It's a bright Tuesday morning, and Karoline Leavitt stands confidently behind the desk in the bustling studio of a live political talk show. The lights beam down, the cameras are rolling, and the audience waits in eager anticipation. Her role as the host is clear: facilitate the conversation, ask the hard-hitting questions, and keep the debate alive. Today's focus is on a controversial figure, a woman who has sparked debate across the country, Marian budde. A well-known figure in the Episcopal Church, she is the guest of honor. Karoline has done her homework. She knows this isn't an ordinary interview. Marian budde is a bishop, someone with significant influence in both religious and social communities. She has been a public figure for years, especially for her outspoken advocacy for LGBTQ+ rights and immigrant support. While her stance has drawn both admiration and criticism, what many don't know is her deeper involvement with government-funded programs and her ties to controversial organizations. Karoline is prepared, not just with standard questions but with a sharp understanding of the allegations surrounding her guest. The studio hums with energy as Karoline's voice cuts through the chatter. Her tone is smooth yet firm as she introduces the show's topic. Today, we dive deep into the story of a woman who claims to fight for justice and equality but has recently come under scrutiny for her financial ties and involvement in politically charged movements. Let's uncover what Marian budde really stands for. The camera shifts to Marian budde, seated calmly across from Karoline. Her faint smile contrasts with the tension in the air. "So, Bishop budde," Karoline begins, her voice measured, "you've made headlines for advocating on behalf of LGBTQ+ individuals and immigrants. You've often positioned yourself as a protector of the vulnerable. But recently, there have been claims about your involvement with groups receiving substantial federal funding, including funds from USAID. How do you respond to those allegations?" The question lands sharply. Marian shifts slightly in her seat, clasping her hands in front of her, maintaining a composed appearance. "Well, Karoline," she begins, "my work has always been about compassion. I believe in supporting the marginalized, whether they're refugees, LGBTQ+ individuals, or those cast aside by society. The funding I've received reflects the need for these programs. We are doing good work, important work." Karoline nods but doesn't let the answer slide. "But some might argue," she presses, "that the programs you support promote policies that go against the values many Americans hold dear. You've received millions of dollars from USAID. Is this funding genuinely being used to support the communities you claim to help, or is it being funneled into advancing a particular political agenda?" For a moment, Marian pauses, and a flicker of discomfort flashes in her eyes. She's no stranger to controversy, but this is a different kind of question. It directly challenges her credibility. "I'm not here to discuss politics, Karoline," she replies, her voice calm though edged with defensiveness. "I'm here to talk about the people we're helping. I'm here to defend those who need us." Karoline isn't backing down. "But aren't your political beliefs intertwined with your religious stance?" she counters. "Aren't the policies you advocate for directly tied to the funding you receive?" The audience listens intently. Karoline is a seasoned host, skilled at navigating challenging conversations. She isn't interested in letting Marian sidestep critical questions. This isn't just about religion or politics, it's about the integrity of organizations receiving taxpayer money. The camera zooms in on Marian as she prepares her response. She's used to pressure, but this feels different. Karoline is digging deeper than most journalists, and the stakes are higher than a soundbite. Public trust hangs in the balance, and Marian knows her words must be chosen carefully. "I'm proud of the work we've done," Marian finally says, her voice steady. "And I'm proud of the partnerships we've formed to help those in need. The funding we receive is fully transparent and used to support people, not political agendas." Karoline remains unconvinced. Her research has revealed that many organizations Marian is linked to have faced scrutiny over their financial practices. These aren't small-time charities, they're entities with significant influence. What about the allegations? Karoline presses further, that some of these organizations have obscured their ties to federal funding, that they've changed their names to avoid detection in the public spending database. Isn't that a form of deceit? Karoline's voice is sharp, her eyes locked on Marian's. The room falls silent. For a split second, Marian's composure falters, but she quickly recovers. "These are baseless accusations, Karoline," she replies, her voice firm yet defensive. "We are doing everything by the book. The work we do is legitimate, and we have nothing to hide." Karoline leans forward, her piercing gaze unwavering. "But you see, Bishop Budde, this isn't just about helping people," she counters. "It's about how those people are being used. You're playing a role in something much bigger than yourself, and it's not just about what's right for your congregation or the people you serve. It's about what's right for the American people who are unknowingly funding these activities." The tension in the room is palpable. Karoline's questions are relentless, and Marian is now firmly on the defensive. The stakes are high, and both women know it. As the interview unfolds, the truth of the situation begins to emerge. The deeper Karoline digs, the more complex the story becomes. What is the real agenda behind the funding Marian receives? Is it genuinely helping those in need, or is it part of a larger political strategy? As the first part of the interview draws to a close, Karoline knows this is just the beginning. The story is far from over, and the revelations are only starting to surface. There is more to uncover, and Karoline will stop at nothing to get to the truth. As the cameras continue to roll, Karoline tightens her grip on the microphone, her gaze never leaving Bishop Marian Budde. The room is heavy with tension, and Karoline senses that the interview is about to take a far more revealing turn. Marian's earlier responses had been deflective, but Karoline is determined to push further into the heart of the matter. "You mentioned earlier," Karoline begins, her voice calm but laced with authority, "that the funding you receive is fully transparent. But there are records showing that significant amounts of taxpayer money have been funneled into organizations that seem to operate under a veil of secrecy. These organizations aren't just focused on religious outreach. They're involved in political movements, social justice causes, and, as some critics claim, even attempting to reshape national policies." Marian's eyes narrow slightly, and for the first time in the interview, there's a flicker of frustration behind her cool exterior. "Karoline," she says, her tone controlled, "we have been involved in helping people in need. This is not about politics. It's about making sure that no one is left behind, whether they're immigrants, LGBTQ+ individuals, or anyone else who is marginalized." Karoline leans forward again, her gaze unwavering. "But, Bishop," she presses, "when you advocate for policies that," as Karoline Leavitt begins her next question, her tone remains calm yet assertive. "Bishop Budde," she says, her voice unwavering, "you've repeatedly emphasized that your mission is rooted in compassion and helping the marginalized. But critics argue that this mission seems increasingly aligned with political movements rather than pure acts of faith. How do you address these claims?" Marian Budde, seated across the table, takes a deep breath before answering. "I understand why some might perceive it that way," she replies, her voice measured, "but the reality is that our work is driven by a moral obligation to uplift those who are often ignored or cast aside. This is not about politics, it's about humanity." Karoline doesn't flinch. Her piercing gaze remains locked on Marian as she presses further. "Yet, Bishop, there are reports indicating that organizations connected to your church have been receiving substantial federal funding. These funds are said to support programs that align with progressive political ideologies. Isn't it fair for the public to question whether this funding serves humanitarian efforts or political objectives?" Marian shifts slightly in her seat, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. "These are baseless accusations," she says firmly, though her tone betrays a hint of unease. "Our work is transparent, legal, and solely focused on helping vulnerable communities." Karoline raises an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "Then why have allegations surfaced suggesting that some of these organizations have altered their names to obscure the federal grants they've received? If everything is above board, why the secrecy?" For a moment, Marian hesitates, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table. "These claims are politically motivated attacks," she counters, her voice carrying an edge of frustration. "We have nothing to hide. Our focus has always been on serving those in need." Karoline leans back slightly, her expression thoughtful yet unyielding. But Bishop, when taxpayer money is involved, don't you have an obligation to provide full transparency? People have a right to know how their funds are being utilized, especially when the initiatives they support may not align with their values. Marian's posture stiffens. Our programs are designed to help those who are suffering, she says, her voice rising slightly in defense. We're not here to engage in partisan debates. We're here to make a difference. Karoline's gaze sharpens. But when your programs align closely with contentious policies, like open borders, unrestricted transgender rights, and abortion advocacy, it's hard to separate your humanitarian work from the political implications. Don't you think this raises valid concerns? Marian exhales deeply, visibly grappling with the weight of the question. Change is often met with resistance, she says finally, her tone quieter now. People fear what they don't understand. But that doesn't mean that change isn't necessary. Our mission is to create a more inclusive and compassionate society. Karoline doesn't miss a beat. Inclusivity is a noble goal, she acknowledges, but what about the rights of those who disagree with your worldview? The right to dissent, to express opposing values. Aren't those rights equally important in a democratic society? Marian's lips tighten, but she responds steadily. I believe in dialogue, she says, her words deliberate. But I also believe we must challenge systems that perpetuate harm or discrimination. Silence in the face of injustice is not an option. Karoline leans forward, her voice dropping slightly, but her intensity unrelenting. Dialogue is one thing, Bishop, but using federal funds to promote a particular set of beliefs that many Americans find polarizing, is another matter entirely. At what point does advocacy cross the line into partisanship? Marian falters for a split second, the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. I never intended to be involved in politics, she says softly. But when people are suffering, when injustice is rampant, it's impossible to stand idly by. Karoline's expression softens for just a moment before she delivers her next question. But by taking a stand, aren't you alienating those who might otherwise support your work? When your efforts are seen as advancing a political agenda, doesn't that undermine the broader goal of unity and compassion? Marian sighs, her voice tinged with exhaustion. I'm trying to do what's right, she says simply, to help those who need it most. That's all I've ever tried to do. Karoline nods, her voice steady as she concludes. Helping people is indeed commendable, Bishop. But when public funds are involved, transparency and accountability are non-negotiable. The American people deserve to know how their resources are being used and whether those uses truly reflect the values of a diverse nation. As the studio falls silent, the tension hangs heavy in the air. The cameras capture every detail, the determination in Karoline's eyes, the weariness in Marian's expression. This is more than just an interview, it's a reckoning, a moment of truth that will reverberate far beyond this room. As Karoline Leavitt shifts toward her next question, her tone stays composed yet firm. Bishop Buddy, she begins, maintaining eye contact, you've repeatedly claimed that your mission is centered on compassion and helping the marginalized. However, critics argue that this mission appears increasingly tied to political agendas rather than pure acts of faith. How do you respond to these allegations? Marian Buddy, seated across the table, inhales deeply before responding. I can understand why some might interpret it that way, she says, her voice calm but deliberate, but our work is guided by a moral obligation to uplift those ignored or cast aside. This isn't about politics, it's about humanity. Karoline doesn't blink. Her gaze remains sharp as she follows up. Yet, Bishop, there are documented reports suggesting organizations connected to your church have received considerable federal funding. These funds reportedly support programs aligned with progressive political ideologies. Is it not fair for the public to question whether this funding is for humanitarian efforts or political motives? Marian adjusts her posture slightly, a faint trace of discomfort appearing in her expression. These accusations are baseless, she says firmly, though her voice carries a slight edge of unease. Our operations are transparent, lawful, and entirely focused on aiding vulnerable populations. Karoline raises her brow, skepticism flickering across her face. If that's the case, why are there allegations that certain organizations under your wing have changed their names to obscure the source of federal grants? If there's nothing to hide, why the lack of transparency? For a brief moment, Marian hesitates, her fingers grazing the table's edge. Such claims are politically motivated, she asserts, her voice tinged with frustration. We operate openly and have nothing to conceal. Our mission remains unchanged, serving those in need. Karoline leans back slightly, a thoughtful yet unwavering expression on her face. But Bishop, when public money is involved, isn't there an inherent responsibility to ensure full transparency? Citizens deserve to know how their tax dollars are spent, especially when the initiatives might conflict with their personal beliefs. Marian straightens in her seat, her posture stiffening. Our programs are dedicated to alleviating suffering, she responds, her voice growing more defensive. We're not engaging in political debates, we're focused on making a tangible difference. Karoline's gaze intensifies. Still, when your programs align closely with controversial policies, like open borders, unrestricted transgender rights, and abortion advocacy, it becomes challenging to distinguish humanitarian efforts from political affiliations. Doesn't this create legitimate public concern? Marian exhales deeply, appearing to weigh the question. Progress often meets resistance, she eventually says, her tone subdued. Fear of change is natural, but that doesn't diminish its necessity.